So this tentative agreement that was reached between Governor Cuomo and the legislative leaders is actually the first sign in weeks that progress is being made on a tax cap. Now, as you'll recall, the governor and the leaders originally announced a cap deal back in May, but we saw no movement until today. Now, today's deal was good news for a lot of upstate lawmakers, including Assemblyman Joe Morelle. But the cap is not a priority for downstate Assembly Democrats, who are more focused on those rent laws, and they're also concerned about losing the support of tax cap opponents like the teachers union. So balancing all of these conflicting interests is getting harder with the tax cap and the rent laws combined into one Uber bill. Joining me now from the Capitol to talk more about this whole situation is Assemblyman Joe Morelle. Assemblyman, it's great to see you.
Always good to be on your show, Liz. Thanks.
Okay, so what is the mood inside your conference? Because we have been hearing some rumblings from the downstate Democrat guys and gals that they're not so thrilled with the rent deal.
Well, actually, I thought in conference, while people express themselves about the various issues and the conversation is candid, that there's great support for it. I think what you're seeing is the first expansion in many, many years of tenants' rights, and this will be, I believe, a 4 or 5 year deal. But this raises from $2,000 to $2,500, a 25% increase, and these are all very, very positive things. So I think at the end of the day, the upstate members are very happy with the property tax cap, and I think there's no question that in the city of New York, those people who are protecting tenants' rights and making certain that there's affordable housing are very happy. So I think this has turned out to be not only this particular deal, but as it relates to the entire session. If we conclude these proposals that are now being really brought to a close, I think this will be probably the finest session in my 21 years in the state legislature, and so I think people are very, very optimistic, and we just want to bring this to a conclusion now.
Wow, the best in 2 decades. That is some serious. That is a serious thing to say. Here's the thing. I mean,
it is, but
go ahead.
Well, I just think, you know, and I heard my friend Joe Griffo say this, so I don't want to be redundant, but when you look at where we've come from in terms of the financial challenges we had, to have concluded a budget on time, to have no new taxes, to have reduced spending, to have reined in the cost of Medicaid, to do all the things that the governor set out to do that in a timely way, and now to have, looks like we're concluding a deal on the property tax cap, ethics legislation, obviously for those in the metro area, the extension of rent control protections. This is something that I think is historic, and I think the governor deserves a great deal of credit for holding fast on his promises to get this done. And I think the leaders, in particular Speaker Silver, have done a great job as well to make sure that there's consensus, to drive consensus, and to move people along in a professional way. So I think this is a great session, and I'm very happy with it.
All of those priorities that you're talking about there are fiscally conservative, right? I mean, you've had a budget that included deep cuts to education and health care. You had the property tax cap. You have a rent laws deal that, while it's extended, is not exactly everything that some of the more progressive advocates wanted. I mean, do you think that this sets the Democrats up against their traditional allies in labor, which I know is a little bit more of a downstate issue than an upstate issue, but labor's ties to the Democratic Party have always been quite strong?
Well, and I think those relationships will continue. They may be somewhat strained, but that's because we're in a financially difficult time. So austerity is necessary because we don't have the dollars to sustain what we were able to do in the past. I think the governor's made that clear, and members of the legislature believe it. And I think the immediate goal is to make sure that we put a sustainable fiscal situation in place, and then we start to grow the economy. And I think a number of the things that we've done and will continue to do over the next several months will start to build that economy. The regional economic councils that will be led by the lieutenant governor. We passed legislation this week on qualified emerging technology grants and something called CAPCOs, which are certified capital companies, to try to drive economic growth. And we do that at the same time that we put together a more sustainable fiscal picture. These are going to lead to growth. This is going to lead to growth in the future, jobs in the future, that will ultimately make everybody in this state happier and better. And I think it's taken the strength of the governor to make that happen, but I think everybody deserves credit. And this will be the first time I think people will say, boy, the legislature and the governor really worked well together and concluded the agenda that the governor said during the campaign and during the State of the State message that he wanted to advance, and we've largely done it. So I think there's a lot of credit to go around to all the participants. This is really a good year.
There's one item there that's left undone. It's gay marriage, of course. But before we get there, I do want to touch on something that is more of an issue that you've been carrying for a long time. It's wine in grocery stores. And this is an issue that
Yes.
you and I have talked about before. A recent Siena poll found 59% of New Yorkers actually would support allowing grocery stores to sell wine, and yet we have seen zero movement in the legislature. Are you disappointed?
I am disappointed. I'm certainly hopeful, as we've now sort of dealt with a lot of the big issues that we needed to deal with in terms of budget and some of these other issues which we've just talked about, that we'll now start to look at some of the other ways that we can experience economic growth in the state. And this is good for consumers. It will put pressure downward on price. It clearly helps the emerging grape growing industry in New York. And I believe this is common sense. And as I like to say, this isn't rocket science. It's been done in 30-plus states. It's time really for New York to get into the 21st century when it comes to being able to advance the economic interests of many different disparate elements of the state. So I do think it's possible to get a deal ultimately that will help safeguard the interests of small businesses that own liquor stores. I think there's a lot that we could do to advance their interest and help provide safeguards and protections. But it really is time for us to advance this, and it means potentially thousands of jobs for New Yorkers in a number of different sectors within this industry. So I think it's important. I don't think it's clearly not going to happen in the next few days,
right.
But I do think it's an important agenda item for next year.
Okay, so before we move on to next year, which it seems like it's eons away because every day is like an eternity down at the Capitol these days.
It is indeed.
Gay marriage,
yes, it is.
Obviously, if you were listening to Senator Griffo, you heard that it's still a little bit up in the air as to whether or not that vote even comes to the floor. If it does come to the floor, there will probably be changes that would require your House to go back and pass this whole thing again. Do you believe the votes are there? It was closer than we expected, but do you believe the votes are there when everybody's tired and wants to go home, that there's not going to be any surprises in your chamber?
Well, I don't think there will be any surprises in our chamber. I think we've obviously passed this bill several times before. We passed it again just last week. I think we understand that in order for us to advance this and for this to become law, we're going to have to make some modifications. So I think it'll be fine in our House. We'll have the votes for it. I hope that they do it in the Senate. I know this is an issue that's been very difficult for a number of people. I have someone in my delegation, Senator Lisi, who's announced that he's switched his position. I know that that's taken a lot of thought and a lot of reflection on his part. But I hope we do it. I think it's time for us to give equal rights to all New Yorkers, and I believe it'll happen. And I give, again, Governor Cuomo credit for putting this on the top of the agenda and moving it and putting as much energy and effort into it. And I think he's really helped give people perspective on it. And that's why I think at the end of the day, the Senate is going to pass this bill, and I believe it will be the law of the land. Yeah,
you know, if it happens in New York, it will be really historic and quite huge. And this is coming at a time where President Obama is actually due in New York City. He's actually going to be also at Fort Drum, but he's due in New York City to have this unprecedented LGBT fundraiser. And he is reportedly thinking of evolving his position. He's pro-civil unions, and perhaps maybe he'll come out for same-sex marriage. There's been a lot of talk about the governor and his aspirations. Do you think that's what this is about? His fiscally conservative, liberally, socially liberal agenda, that he's setting himself up for something bigger?
No, I think the governor believes in this. I believe he feels very strongly about equal rights for all New Yorkers. This is something he campaigned on, and I don't think this has any reflection on his personal goals at all. I think he's obviously just 6 months into his first term as governor,
Indeed.
And which I hope will be multiple terms as governor. But I actually talked to him earlier today, and he's obviously very interested in what we're hearing in terms of legislators and particularly the senators. But he just feels deeply about this, and I give him a lot of credit, as I said, for continuing to push this agenda item, because it's important, but it's one that a lot of people might have stepped back from if they were in his situation.
Yeah, and the governor strike you as in a good mood, actually, Assemblyman, because from the footage I've seen, he's looking pretty chipper.
Well, I think, you know, the governor is working very hard, and I said to him, look, I think we're doing very, very well here. You're doing a great job on your agenda, but you know, I think he understands that there's still a lot to be done in the next 48 hours, and so he's working very hard. He's committed to it. Hopefully he'll have a chance to reflect a little bit once we're done, and I think he should be very, very happy with what he's done, what the legislature's done. But if I know the governor, he's not going to rest for the next 2 or 3 days until all the agenda items are concluded.
And neither will we until you guys leave the Capitol, and we are sure that you are not voting anymore. I want to thank you very much, Assemblyman Morelle, for joining us. It's great to see you.
Always great to see you, Liz. Thanks so much.